Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
Located on Lake Pontchartrain, Brisbee's Lakefront Restaurant and Bar offers traditional West End favorites, a scenic view, oysters, and numerous tasty options. More information is available at 504-304-4125 or brisbeesrestaurant.com. Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House has been shucking here since 1979. Located at 3117 21st Street in Metairie, Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House offers raw, fried, and grilled oysters as well as a range of Cajun and Creole dishes. Enjoy a dozen with a smile. Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is the first place award winner of the 2015 New Orleans Press Club's Excellence in Journalism Award for the category of Best TV Sports Show.
Good evening, New Orleans, and welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hour, we're going to dive into the New Orleans Saints. Got two great writers that cover the Saints, Joel Erickson of the New Orleans Advocate and Mike Triplett of ESPN. We'll go to phone calls a little bit later on in the program. Guys, welcome to the show. As always, thanks so much for coming down. Happy New Year to both of you. And we always like to start off letting the folks know a little bit about the publications you guys are involved in. Joel, why don't you start it off for us tonight?
Obviously worked for the Advocate, teamed up with Nick Underhill over there on the Saints. Rod Walker's been doing a good job on just about everything New Orleans, and obviously you got Ross Dellinger and Scott Rabelais leading the crew up there in Baton Rouge.
How can folks follow you on social media?
I'm at Joel A. Erickson on Twitter, and we don't really do the Facebook thing or anything.
There you go. Mike, welcome back, and you've kind of dove in. I read your stuff, but I also go to the videos, doing a lot of stand-ups for ESPN. Tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing.
Yeah, it's been a few years now. I think maybe by this point people are used to it. The idea,
Yeah.
I mean, so we cover the teams the same way that the Advocate and the Times-Picayune do, but ESPN hired somebody in every single market. So it's ESPN TV when the Saints are worthy, which unfortunately 3 straight 7 and 9 seasons, those Sports Center appearances are less and less, but it's also covering the team every day on the website as well.
Thanks for being with us as always. And how can they follow you on social media?
At Mike Triplett.
Thanks, guys. Well, the big bombshell was the firing or the contracts not renewed of Joe Vitt, Bill Johnson, Greg McMahon, James Willis, and Stan Kwan. Joel, I'll take you first. Surprised that this happened? Surprised that there was this massive of a shakeup within Peyton's staff?
Maybe for me, more surprised with the front 7 guys. It seemed like when they brought in Kevin O'Day in the middle of the season to help special teams, it seemed like maybe they were going to make a move there, especially given all of especially first half of the season problems they had on special teams. I guess, Bill Johnson, Joe Vitt, and James Willis, those ones surprised me a little bit more. But like Mike just said, 3, 7, and 9 seasons, there's going to be a shakeup somewhere.
Yeah. Mike, you've been covering this team since Peyton's been here. You know the relationship between Joe Vitt and Sean Payton. To me, that was the biggest shocker of all of them.
I never thought Joe Vitt would be.
Neither did I, ever.
I thought he was linked with Sean Payton, and here's the reason why. Saints fans are right, and they've been. I feel like I've been getting calls for Joe Vitt's heads for years because they're right. The Saints have not developed linebackers under his watch, and the defense has been terrible. They've gone through 5 defensive coordinators. So why is the linebackers coach not going anywhere? Well, the title that always meant more with Joe Vitt was assistant head coach.
Yes.
He was Peyton's mentor, guiding him, a veteran guy who guided Peyton. But, oh, my gosh, the guys from every era, Steve Gleason, Scott Fujita, Drew Brees, Kenny Vaccaro I just talked to. Kenny Vaccaro's been here for 4 years, and he said, I love Joe Vitt. Like, they love Joe Vitt, and Sean Payton loves Joe Vitt. So I was very surprised. But you know why he got fired. You know why all these guys got fired, because it's been one of the historically worst defenses in the history of the NFL. They need new idea guys in there. That's what they finally said, you know what, we just need some new ideas. But everybody loves Joe Vitt.
Bill Johnson is a guy that has been much maligned here in the city of New Orleans. But when you look at this year's defensive line and you look at Fairley, the first time that really in his NFL career that he's really blossomed. You look at Onyemata playing in Canadian football, 12-man football, coming in and playing really well for the Saints with really not a lot of, I guess not a lot of experience in that type of football. And then of course you look at Rankins. To me, previous years, I'd say, yeah, no problem, move him. But I was a little bit surprised after such a really good year by the defensive line that ultimately Bill Johnson would have been moved. What are your thoughts there? Because look, if you look at the tail of the tape over the since after the 2009 season, and I've talked about it before, Johnson, McMahon, Vitt, untouchable. But for the most part, the defensive line didn't play bad this year.
No, they were better, but some of the individual positives that you see maybe didn't necessarily add up to a big leap overall. They were actually a sack down from where they were this time last year. They had some young guys that have the tools, didn't really step up in those positions. When Hali Kakaha went down, we all thought that Kasim Edebali or Aboom Gwacham or Davis Tull or somebody like that a young player was going to step into it. That position ended up being Paul Kruger's, and they didn't really get much out of it for the season. So there were some positives, especially at the defensive tackle position. But overall, I don't know that the production was there, other than the run defense was much better. But you just didn't see as much out of the pass rush in terms of, you think you bring in all those guys and have all that positive, that the sacks would have gone up, and they actually didn't.
Right. You know what I'll say too, Eric, is it's probably the same answer as why they stayed for so long. You can't judge a coach strictly by how the players at his position group play. The same reason that I think those guys were there for a long time. The same with Greg McMahon. Right. What you think of the coaches, how they are to work with, what ideas they're presenting in the room, how innovative they are. All those kind of things that fans don't see. You don't say, how many sacks did defensive linemen have this year? Okay, you did a good job. I mean, one of the reasons for the improved defensive line play is because that's where they invested. Sheldon Rankins and Nick Fairley. Huge bonus for them this year. So I think the main thing that they decided on defense, and look, when they fired Rob Ryan and brought in Dennis Allen, here's a term I know I've heard Sean Payton use, a scientist in the room. That's what Dennis Allen is. And I think the idea is, who's coming up with new innovations, who's thinking outside of the box, who's advancing this defense? And I think that's probably what it was. They probably realized, you know what, we need just an overall fresh take on this defense. They liked Dennis Allen a lot. They liked Aaron Glenn a lot this year. But I think they also decided, let's get a Dennis Allen and Aaron Glenn throughout the defense.
Right. Mike, who do you think made this decision? Did this decision come? It came
Payton.
from Sean, didn't come from Mickey Loomis, didn't come from Benson? It came directly from Sean Payton?
Yeah. Now, you could say maybe Sean felt like it was something he had to do, but there was no pressure on him being said, you're going to lose your job if you don't do this. Look, Sean, I think, sure, they don't want to think he's out flirting with other teams or anything like that. They're happy with the job Sean Payton is doing. You can tell that by the contract they gave him last year. They thought long and hard about a possible divorce last year, and they said, we could go out and hire our Doug Marrone or our Vance Joseph.
Yes.
We want Sean Payton, just like they think other teams would want Sean Payton. And I think he's been really rejuvenated since 2014. I think they were happy with what he's doing. So there's nobody undercutting him at the knees and saying, Sean, we're now going to tell you what to do. You're out the door. Sean Payton is running his coaching staff as much as he ever has.
Joel, you concur with that?
Yeah, I mean, well, and one thing that they changed the secondary coaches last year in terms of what Mike's been saying about they trying to get new ideas in this defense. That's the reason that there probably wasn't a change in the secondary coaches this year, is they just did that. This is just overhauling the rest of the defense, and it kind of fits, honestly, with what they started last year in terms of the moves they made on the coaching staff.
How about where this came from? Do you feel like this came from Sean, didn't come from Mickey or Mr. Benson?
Yeah, I would. Sean's generally presented as being right in front of the coaching staff. So it's got to
He's
come from
not
him.
losing power on
Right,
this
and
team.
that's been talked about. Talked about on this show. Talked about on the radio show. That especially because of the relationships between these guys. They've been together so long.
If there was a time where Tom Benson or Mickey Loomis thought Sean Payton had overstayed his decade, that would have been last year, and it didn't. They re-upped with him last year. There's nothing that happened this season that made them less confident in Sean Payton. This season went according to plan, and actually, I think everybody's happy the direction it's pointed. Same record, but I picked them to go 7-9 this year. It's not like people thought this was supposed to be a playoff team this year. They have been doing a rebuilding. They overhauled the scouting department the year before they overhauled the coaching staff. They lost a lot of tough games this year, but the offense, we probably sat here at least 2 years ago and maybe even a little last year thinking, boy, they've got a lot of work cut out for them because not only do they have to rebuild this defense, but now the offense, all their receivers have gotten old, all their offensive linemen have gotten old. They've pretty much already rebuilt the offense. They're heading in the right direction. Now, Super Bowl season direction? No. I mean, that will take a lot. But if they gave this guy $9 million, or what was it? I'm drawing a blank now. Was it $9 million a year? More than $9 million a year 1 year ago? They are not unhappy with the returns they saw over the last 12 months.
Dan Campbell brought in as a co-assistant head coach. You mentioned Kevin O'Day, how he came in. All of a sudden, Lutz is kicking the ball very, very well. Bryant Young has been mentioned as a guy that's really been hands-on with the defensive line. Are those guys elevated now, or do they look outside the organization for fresh ideas?
Well, here's what happens when you hire in any job. You want to take that opening and get the biggest catch you can. You don't want to just be like, no, we only need entry-level assistants now. So they will probably go and try to lure, and sometimes to lure a guy, like when they got Dan Campbell last year, they gave him the title of assistant head coach, and maybe we should have known the writing was on the wall for Joe Vitt then, because it's the first time they've ever had two assistant head coaches in a decade. So maybe they will go and try to. I don't know anyone they've talked to, but you know what I mean. Somebody that is a veteran assistant, and they'll call him assistant head coach, and they'll call when they hired Dennis Allen, they called him senior assistant. They created a new title for him. When they hired Jeff Ireland, they called him assistant general manager. So I don't think they're just going to say, no, we just need two position coaches. That's it. I think they'll go big, but I do think that the Dan Campbell hire, even though it was the other side of the ball, I think maybe he becomes that now number two assistant head coach, and Dennis Allen too. They've got some powerful voices. I think anyone else they hire would probably fall under those guys in the overall umbrella. But I do think they'll think big and try to land a big name if they can.
What's your gut on that?
Well, I mean, this isn't. The thing is, I came from covering college where they had a set number of assistant coaches they had to have, and then they'd fill in as analysts. The Saints don't have to worry about that. The roles can shake out in terms of elevating the guys that you mentioned and filling people in based on who they're able to get to fill these positions on the staff. So really, they can kind of do whatever they want here. If you wanted to bring in, I'm not saying they'll do this, but if they wanted to, they could bring in a third secondary coach to add to that room if they wanted to. They can do whatever they want in terms of that stuff. So I'm with Mike. I think you're out there looking for whatever you can get, whoever's out there and available who can take this defense and help Dennis Allen go from the small steps it made this year to making much larger steps next season.
How much of an influence do you think Dennis Allen's going to have on these hires on the defensive side of the ball?
Oh, I think he'd have to. I mean, it's his scheme. It's his. He's got a specific way he wants, especially the front seven to play, especially the defensive line to play. So I would assume he's going to want someone who's got maybe the more of a background with penetration. In the defensive line, as opposed to maybe a 3-4 guy who's used to getting pluggers, or who's used to coaching pluggers.
I would imagine, too, that Dennis Allen, and I don't know this for a fact, but just from knowing his relationship with Peyton and the success he had this year, I bet he's got as much clout as probably the most clout any defensive coordinator has ever had in the Peyton tenure, because Peyton really liked Gary Gibbs, and I remember he was really heartfelt when he had to let him go. But Gary Gibbs had never really earned anything based on merit. What they produced on the field to get that sort of clout. And then, Greg Williams, obviously great results, but a tumultuous relationship throughout. Steve Spagnuolo lasted a year. Rob Ryan And I think Sean Payton respected how hard he worked, but didn't see eye to eye with the way he went about business, organization-wise and everything. Sean Payton really likes Dennis Allen and saw the results this year. So you add those two things together, I bet he's got about as much clout as any defensive coordinator's ever had here.
Mike, since you've been covering this team since 2006, do you feel like that the defensive coordinators were hamstrung because they had to take on Joe Vitt, they had to take on Johnson, they weren't able to bring their guys in? For the most part, and when a new DC came in, the most they did was maybe bring in their secondary guy. Did that hamstring the coordinators that came in?
Not necessarily. I mean, I'd have to go through them one by one, but when you say had to take on Bill Johnson, this guy had a huge reputation. Greg Williams, I remember him talking about that almost drew him here. They hired them together in 2009 and won a Super Bowl together. So Joe Vitt, I think the respect level for Joe Vitt is really high. Now, the one negative with Joe Vitt, if you're a defensive coordinator who doesn't see eye to eye with Sean Payton, is Vitt was Payton's guy.
Yeah.
I mean, we even know through the Bounty Gate testimony that Vitt's role was sort of to spy on Greg Williams for Sean Payton. So you could say that. But like I said, Joe Vitt, maybe they should have just hired a linebackers coach and let Joe Vitt be assistant head coach. He's the guy who broke down the team on Saturday nights. He was big on the stat that's going to stand out, the message, the 3 talking points that everyone's going to take into the next game or whatever. So I don't know. Maybe you should. Maybe a coach could have said, "Hey, can I bring in someone else to coach the linebackers?" And Joe Vitt could just be senior assistant on defense or something like that. But no, I don't necessarily think that would have derailed anyone. But yeah, you would say maybe Rob Ryan's tenure is probably the only one that we could look at and we could say, Rob Ryan did not get to hire any of his staff.
Right.
And he stepped into a situation where he was working with all of Sean's guys, and if Sean and Rob didn't see eye to eye, I could see why that's not an ideal situation for Rob Ryan. A much better situation would be, you're in charge of the defense, it's all yours. Hire your staff, run your system. And sure, and look, I think a greater picture, there's probably no question that a personality as dynamic as Sean Payton's, he is probably making demands or saying, I want my defense to look like this, or he probably maybe would be better served to say, I do offense, you do defense, I'm completely leaving it up to you, and hire a strong-willed guy who could do that. And the fact that he didn't mesh great with Greg Williams and Rob Ryan tells you that he's not the kind of guy. He wants to work with the defensive coordinator. Right. So that's why the Dennis Allen hire is probably a good one, because it's a smart guy who he gets along with, and when they communicate, Dennis Allen can probably say, I know what you're looking for, and I can make it work, you know?
And he's one of Payton's guys.
Yeah.
You know, which has always been big. Your thoughts? In your time here, did you ever feel that the coordinator was hamstrung because they had to take on Payton's guys?
Well, I haven't been here that long, and so before Allen, the coordinator was Rob Ryan. And honestly, a lot of the things that were problems with Rob Ryan here, regardless of who the rest of his staff were, are the problems that have got him out of jobs in other places. It just happened a couple weeks ago after Rex Ryan was fired. There was quotes from Bills players talking about the defense was too complicated. Rob took it over, and it was too complicated, and we couldn't learn it. And that's kind of some of the stuff that we were reporting my first year here. So I don't necessarily know that that's something that can be blamed on who his assistants were if it's followed him in several different places. Yes. And other than the first season he was here with New Orleans, Rob Ryan's track record isn't that fantastic. So to some degree, maybe he'd like to have had different assistants, but the question is, how much does it help him if he's got this problem with things that are over complex and hard to understand, and it's followed him from one job to the next job to the next job?
Mike, you mentioned Joe Vitt's role, especially the night before a game. He was the guy that gave the speech. He got guys fired up. Who takes on that role now? I'm
guessing maybe Dan Campbell. Makes sense. They hired him as an assistant head coach, which is the exact same title. That's Dan Campbell's specialty. He was I don't want to say rah-rah guy because sometimes that has a negative connotation, but he's a guy who is a leader of men. They made him the interim head coach in Miami. Everybody wanted to go to battle with him. Makes perfect sense for him to take on that vocal leadership role on this team.
You concur?
Yeah, I mean, everything we heard about Dan Campbell, and part of the reason he was in such demand after he didn't get the Miami Dolphins head job was because of his motivational capabilities. I mean, tight ends coach to straight to head coach isn't necessarily the normal thing unless you've got this specific gift, which he has.
We saw Will Lutz really turn it around when Kevin O'Day came in. Is he the odds-on favorite in your mind to be the special teams coordinator here, or will he be an assistant on this staff, or will they move on completely?
Well, it makes perfect sense, and they didn't dismiss him
Right.
like the other guys,
Sure.
so you assume he's staying, and it makes perfect sense. Although they may have discovered one thing this year, which is that they want more people on that staff. I mean, maybe they'll have a kicking coordinator and a special teams coordinator as two separate jobs, because that's a pretty big task to be in charge. Like, here's the thing we found out with Greg McMahon is, like, if your return game isn't very good, blame McMahon.
Right.
If your coverage units aren't very good, blame McMahon. The punter's having problems, blame McMahon. If the kicker's not getting his ball high enough, blame McMahon.
That's right.
All of a sudden you realize maybe there should be more than one guy running things. And obviously Stan Kwan got let go too. So maybe they've decided, you know what, this is a job that requires 3 men instead of 2. But I think Kevin Day obviously will continue in some capacity.
Your thoughts?
I think the other thing about them bringing on somebody is that when they first brought in Kevin O'Day, Sean said that he was brought in part to work on the long snap, hold, kick thing. So that's, I guess, what Sean considers his specialty at the beginning. So you'd expect to see somebody else to come in to help him with some of the other stuff. I'm sure he's got plenty of expertise in the other stuff, but if you're, as Mike just pointed out, there's a ton of stuff that encompasses special teams. Why not have several different brains?
And we talked so much up about Joe Vitt. I feel like Greg McMahon's a guy we never talked about or whatever, but I mean, I understand why he had to go too, but it's funny. I saw this theory on the internet about, Sean and Greg both went to Eastern Illinois together, and he's just being loyal to his old buddy.
Right.
Like, this is a guy who designed Ambush, the greatest, which was voted the greatest play in Saints history in the middle of the Super Bowl. Thomas Morstead set the all-time NFL record for net punting. 3 years ago, they were number 1 in punt coverage. So it's like, yeah, the return game stinks. No doubt about it. They need to figure out the return game and maybe bring in a return man as well as a guy with better return game. And yes, the kicking problems were huge this year. But to act like Greg McMahon doesn't have incredible skins on the wall over the last decade is ridiculous.
Guys, different tone we heard from Drew Brees. You guys were in the locker room. You interviewed him after the game, concluding with Atlanta, and then on Monday when you guys got a chance to go one-on-one with him there. After the game, the usual Brees, looking forward to the future, very, very upbeat, positive. The Brees on Monday was a guy that was looking to not to sign a long-term deal, a guy that was enthusiastic about the next year, but was taking a wait-and-see, it seemed like a wait-and-see attitude. Joel, I'll take you first. Is this basically a one-year deal for Brees to, it's playoffs or bust, it's making great strides or bust, and then maybe if he's not happy with the direction of the team, that he tests free agency?
Well, I don't think that's just from Brees' side of things. I mean, he pushed for this long-term deal when all this was going on around training camp and all that time, right around that time, and didn't get it. The Saints didn't give him that deal. They gave him a one-year extension. So with this, from the Saints' perspective, they didn't set it up so that he could have what he wanted in the first place. So it's both sides this season have set this season up, at least the quarterback position, in sort of a let's see where we are at the end of this. Because the hard thing with legendary quarterbacks who get up there in age is you don't necessarily always, there's not necessarily always this big sign that the end is coming or something's going on with a team. There's a lot of them. If you go through and just look at their stats over the years, a lot of them have great years and then fall off. And the team sort of set it up where both sides can take a look at it on a one-year deal and say, okay, do we want to extend this further, or is it time to do the unthinkable and move on?
What's your take on
Well,
that?
Joel's exactly right about that, and I would take it even further. My interpretation, and I could be wrong, but when I heard Brees talking, it was, I found out last year they don't want to sign me to a long-term extension, so this year I'm not going to make a big deal out of it. Like, Brees would sign a 10-year deal with the Saints right now. I think, for the right money.
Right, sure.
But he doesn't want to. He doesn't have dreams of saying, you know what, scrap this. let me try to take on the Jets and bring them to a Super Bowl while I'm 40. He was a year away. He was 6 months away from that. And a team would have paid him. I bet he'd get the way he played this last year. He would get to go take over the Jets or the Broncos right now. 2 years, $60 million. I'm not crazy, right?
No, not at all.
So, but that's not what he wanted. He wanted a long-term deal, and when he didn't get a long-term deal, you know what he signed last year? It was basically a franchise tag.
Right.
He signed a 1-year, $24 million deal. So
and gave him cap relief.
And he was, he goes, let's make this a non-issue. Let's not make it the headline every week. Breeze is leaving. Breeze has got 15 games left. Breeze has got 14 games left. But here we are again. He's in the final year of his deal.
Right.
He wanted the long-term deal. So he's not looking to be like, good, I can finally move on from here. Now, if that has to happen, I'm sure he has the self-confidence that he will go pick a team that he thinks he can lead to the Super Bowl. And actually, I mentioned the Jets. They were in a lot better shape a year ago. I kept thinking, maybe he'd want that.
Right.
I mean, give them their first Super Bowl in 50 years or something like that. He wanted to stay.
Right.
So I don't think he's thinking that. I think the Saints want the year-to-year flexibility. I think one of these years they're going to draft a quarterback in round 1. They're still able to be picky about it. Like last year, if Goff fell to them or they only had to trade up to number 7, maybe. They didn't like Paxton Lynch. This year, Deshaun Watson just moved himself out of the Saints' reach. But, if they love a guy, there'll be a year where they'll take one in round 1. And then that'll have to be Breeze's last year. But I would sign Breeze to a 4-year deal and let's concentrate on everything else because we can win with this guy. But they're the team that wants to go year by year.
I'm going to throw this out to both of you. I'll start with you, Mike. Isn't that exactly what's going to happen next year? The media, the fan base, looking at this as a 1-game-at-a-time deal. So, hey, only 15 games with Breeze, 14 games with Breeze. Breeze is throwing for 5,000 yards.
The difference now is he was spectacular last year, or he was spectacular this past season.
Yes.
The year before that, he struggled a little bit. And
but he was a little bit injured.
He had the 2 injuries.
Right.
And the year before that, he struggled and had the injuries. And it was like, are we seeing sort of now? I don't think anyone thinks Drew Brees is almost done right
now. He's
now.
declining, right?
Right, and so I think now we know the Saints want flexibility, but everybody's kind of shown their cards. The Saints want year-to-year flexibility. Drew Brees wants to stay. So as long as the Saints want Brees and offer him a fair deal, he'll keep coming back here. I think, even if it's as a free agent as opposed to a guy with 1 year left on his deal. I think we now know that Drew Brees, it's not like, oh, if you let him get to free agency, he's gone.
Right.
I don't think there's that sense. Okay. He'll take Houston's 35. Right. He doesn't want to go become Houston's quarterback for $35 million. He wants to stay as long as the team is heading in the right direction. Now, if the team goes 4-12 next year, then we'll be talking about, is this Drew Brees' last season every year? If they make a playoff run, I don't think we'll be talking about that.
Joe, lay it out there, your thoughts on this.
Well, I think to some degree it depends on Brees. And now, Brees last offseason didn't spend a whole bunch of time talking about this and bringing it back up, although there were, his agent would go on Rich Eisen or one of those shows and say something. But I think Brees holds some cards here in how much attention there is. Because if we ask him, what about your contract, and we get the exact same thing he said after the day after the season every time, you get to a point where what is there to write other than they're playing out this season and then we'll see what happens.
Well, he's a savvy guy, and that's why I said that was my interpretation when he made those comments. Is last year we started talking about his contract the day after the season ended. And then when we saw him at the Super Bowl, you saw him in the Super Bowl, asked a question about the contract. We saw him at the charity softball game. We asked him about his contract. And it was the off-season topic from January 1st through September 1st. And I think it was his way of setting up an off-season that'll be exactly what Joel just described, which is every time you ask me about it, I'm not worried about that this year. I'm just going to play.
Will it take a winning season to keep him here? A winning season, playoffs?
I'm with Mike. I think Drew wants to stay.
Okay.
So I think it rests on whether or not the Saints, on what the Saints decide they want to do with him after that. And I don't know how. It depends on how the losing season goes for what
and
they
it
want to do.
And it might actually be where April comes before January in the calendar. It's like if they draft Deshaun Watson this year, they don't re-sign Brees next year.
Right.
If they don't, and Breeze throws for 4,800 yards, they're like, hey, Drew, let's do the 1 year, $30 million deal. Let's do the 2 year, $55 million deal.
Right.
When they think either the bottom has dropped out or the replacement is in town, then they stop paying. That's why if it was up to them, they'd sign him to a 1 year deal every year.
Right.
Players are the ones who want long-term deals.
And if you're Breeze, why would you? You want to have some
Breeze
sense of
wants the
security.
long-term
You want the
deal,
security. You want a sense of security. You want that guaranteed
But
money.
they sort of made him make a choice last year, and he could be a month away from free agency right now. He chose a 1 year deal over free agency.
Is Peyton and Breeze tied at the hip? If next year, another 7-9 season, maybe the Saints part ways with Peyton, is that the end of the Breeze era as well?
I don't think so. I think Breeze would outlast Peyton. I think Peyton would leave for the right job. These rumors don't come out of nowhere. No. But I will say this, they're over-exaggerated because Peyton has never been like, I'm leaving the Saints. But he's got the, I'm willing to listen. And so it would take a great job. I don't think the Colts really interested him last year, although I don't know who balked. I know the 49ers, that's not the right situation. If the Rams had rolled out the red carpet and said, we really want you to take over our team this year and our Jared Goff, and we're going to offer the Saints whatever they want, maybe that would have happened this year. And if the Cowboys flame out ever and Jerry Jones comes calling, he'll go to the Cowboys. There are 2 or 3 jobs that could theoretically lure Peyton away in the next year or two. I think it's low odds that happens. But if Peyton had left this year, Breeze would have stayed, and they might have hired a Doug Marrone or a Dennis Allen or let's keep this trajectory. If they're 10-6 next year and Peyton leaves, Breeze is definitely staying, and they're hiring and Pete Carmichael's staying as the offensive coordinator. So if things are going well and Peyton leaves, Breeze is still a great quarterback option for no matter who your next head coach is. It's not all or nothing with those two. But, I mean, my best guess is that they'll both be here for 3 more years. But if Peyton somehow left to take another job, I still think you keep Breeze.
Are they tied at the hip?
It's very hard. It's hard for me to tell. I would say that if they have a really bad season, if it's 4-12 or something like that, if they just completely fall off the table, then the temptation for me, I don't know about the Saints, but the temptation for me would be if Peyton's going to leave, I would, let's just
If you feel like you can't make a playoff run that year, then you don't re-sign.
Let's start over.
Let's start over and try to get. I guess in that case, you'd be saying, can we try to take this young foundation and tie it to a different head coach and quarterback? Other than that, I pretty much agree with everything Mike said. Unless you're in a situation where Peyton's gone because everything went horribly. Yeah.
Peyton's being fired because they went 3-13, and I guess I was taking the rosy-eyed optimist view of even if it's another. Although I will say this, I think things would be a lot different. I don't know why 4 straight 7-9 seasons is so much worse than 3 straight 7-9 seasons, but I've written this a couple times that it's 2017 or bust for these guys because I'm okay with the fact that this is the 3rd straight 7-9 season because it's kind of not. If you would have told me their records the last 3 years were 4-12, 6-10, 8-8, that's what these last 3 years feel like to me. It feels like 2014 was awful. 2015 was a little better. And this year, boy, they almost made a playoff run. That's how it feels to me, even though it says 7-9, 7-9, 7-9. But that means the next year has to be another step up. They sort of restarted everything in 15. Let's revamp the roster. Let's revamp the scouting department. Let's revamp the coaching staff. And this year could have been a little better. This year they could have been the Detroit Lions. Right. They could have got to that 10 with a bunch of close wins, made their first-round playoff exit. People would feel a lot. I think them and the Lions are, them and the Buccaneers are the same, But they want to be the Falcons. And that's what they're, the season the Falcons just had. But so yeah, if 7-9 next year would be a big disappointment.
The other thing about this season that Mike didn't mention was part of the reason it feels like there was improvement is this schedule ended up being much more difficult even than people thought it was at the beginning. I mean, when we all did our schedule analysis at the beginning of the season, everyone thought, well, first 4 games you got to make hay there. Well, the first 4 games ended up being against Oakland, who had 11 wins, New York, who had 11 wins, and Atlanta, who's
And then
Because of
what
this
was it, the
offensive lead.
fifth game that was at Kansas City? They almost won at Kansas City.
Right.
That's a 12-4 team
Right.
too.
They ended up being just a schedule just chock full
Right.
of playoff or right at playoff teams. And just to back up Mike's point about it getting better, I know for a fact, I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but their point differential the last 2 years was in the negatives. This year it was in the positive. So that's a sign of a team that was maybe a little bit better than at 7-9.
You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports each and every Thursday night right here on WLAE-TV at 6 p.m. You can catch us on Friday here on WLAE-TV at 10 p.m. and also statewide every Friday at 9 o'clock on Pelican Sports Television. Great panel for you tonight. Mike Triplett of ESPN, Joel Erickson of The Advocate. I'm your host, Eric Asher. We'll be right back.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Amco Fence, locally owned and operated since 1976. Fully licensed and insured and a member of the BBB, Amco serves both residential and commercial customers. If you're looking to repair, replace, or install a fence for security or aesthetic reasons, Amco Fence supplies wooden, metal, chain link, vinyl, and ornamental or automatic gates. Amco aims to satisfy your fencing needs. Amco Fence, 504-468-9559 or amcofencecompany.com.
TikTok Cafe, located on Causeway South at the I-10 in Metairie, is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Our menu offers breakfast dishes like our Western omelet made from scratch biscuits, grits, egg sunny side up, and lunch specials like our homemade cheeseburgers with a side of golden brown fries. Don't forget about our weekday lunch special and that every Tuesday is steak night. TikTok Cafe, open 24/7 at Causeway South at the I-10 in Metairie.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. Our guests tonight, Joel Erickson of The Advocate and Mike Triplett of ESPN. Guys, let's take the Peyton thing for a moment. Yeah. We touched on it for a few minutes. Where do you think Mike, you and I have had this discussion on the show previously. Yeah. This year, where did this come from? Did it come from the Peyton camp, as a lot of us believe it did? If so, why? And how serious was Peyton to the Rams, the rumors out there, or his yearning to maybe be the next coach of the Los Angeles Rams?
I think there's a big difference between last year and this year. Last year, it started like week 4.
Oh, yeah.
And it was serious. I thought Peyton was leaving last year. I really did. I think he had at least one foot out the door. At least he was completely ready to explore all other options. And I think what changed was he explored those options, and he was like, none of this is better than what I got. Now, like I said, Dallas might be different. The New York Giants might be different. There's a few jobs that would be. The Green Bay Packers would be different or something like that if that ever came open. I thought maybe the Colts would be a possibility. I don't know on whose end that wasn't a possibility. But the one thing we learned for a fact that we could have guessed with Peyton is he's in a position to be very, very picky. Like, he will leave for the right job. It's probably like Nick Saban. I mean, we hear about Nick Saban every year. And I don't think Nick Saban is staying in Alabama forever because he's loyal and by golly, he'll never leave. But to pry him away from Alabama, it better be the best job ever. And I think Peyton is very similar to that. But I do think we learned last year that he's receptive to the idea of exploring. And so I think this year it became a little bit, maybe it was talking to people who know Peyton's thinking, not necessarily Peyton's agent placing a call to the NFL Network and saying, here's what I'd like you to report on Sunday. But maybe people making calls to people who know Peyton's way and thinking, what if the Rams call? And talking to the Rams and finding out the Rams might kick the tires on. It's probably like John Gruden. John Gruden's never left Monday Night Football. But what if the Rams called and they had lunch and they, so I think he's in that John Gruden, Nick Saban class. He's not in the Bill Cowher. That guy's never going back to coaching. But he's not in the, he's leaving no matter what, and he's desperate to leave.
Where do you think it comes from?
As far as where it comes from, it's hard for me to know. The one thing that stuck out for me after this was all over was when a lot of these reports were coming out, especially the very last week of the season, the other reports that were coming out of Los Angeles were they're interviewing Sean McVay, who they're hiring, and they're interviewing this coordinator and that coordinator and this coordinator and that coordinator. And it just didn't seem to me like it could be that serious. Because to me, if you're going to trade for a coach, that's your guy.
Yeah.
You're not interviewing him along with 15 other coordinators.
Well, you have to interview a minority, but other than that, yes, I agree.
You know what I mean? So you're not setting up interviews with 15 coordinators and Sean Payton if he's your target. Like, if he's your target, you're going after him. And so the thing that I thought was, as much as this dominated the news cycle, as much as this was talked about and everything, it just felt like something wasn't adding up when you see, in the same vein as the Sunday Splash report, you see, well, they're going to talk to both coordinators from New England, and they're going to talk to Washington's offensive coordinator, and they're going to talk to Buffalo's offensive coordinator. It's like, but if you're trading for him, that's got to be the guy.
Needs this offseason. Take the draft first and then free agency. I know
you can't go in that order, though.
You really got to go free agency first, then draft. Yeah. And I do want to talk about the quarterback situation because can they wait another year? Should they go after a quarterback? Is Garrett Grayson the answer? He doesn't seem to be at this point. What are your thoughts? So let's take the quarterback first, and then we'll morph into free agency.
Well, quarterback you can separate because they are. I'm going to make a bold prediction here on your show. They're not signing a free agent quarterback this year. That's that's my guess.
Right. Well,
but no, every other position when we talk needs, and credit the Saints, they've done a pretty good job. They do not want to go into the draft needing to draft any position.
Sure.
No team does, but they've really practiced that too, what they've preached. Last year, they wanted a pass rushing defensive tackle, and everybody thought they were going to sign Sheldon Rankins, but they still signed Nick Fairley. And they ended up with both of them. But you do not want to get stuck saying, all right, and now you know who I think they wanted to draft last year was a guard. And they were really disappointed at the end of day one when two guards who were not projected to go in round one went like 26th and 28th to the Niners and the Seahawks. They were pretty dejected, and they had to settle for Michael Thomas, which worked out okay. But you asked specifically about the quarterback, and I think that they are, and now this will be the third straight year where they're ready to draft a quarterback. And if they love the guy, if they think the guy could potentially start for a decade, they will draft him. They'll draft him at 11? Is that right? Yep. They'll draft him at 11. They'll trade up to 6 for him if they love him. Or they'll draft him in the second or third round if they love him. But if all 7 rounds go by, they won't reach for one. I think that's where they are now, but they have definitely the last 3 years, they're going to work everybody out, they're going to visit everybody, and they're going to research everybody.
What about the quarterback? Did they draft one this year?
I'm with Mike on it depends on how things fall. Because right now it looks like there's going to be, if you look at a lot of the draft experts and their big boards right now, it looks like there should be 3 quarterbacks or 2 quarterbacks available when the Saints pick at 11. But we found out last year that doesn't mean anything.
It never works.
Because 2 teams might trade up, and then it's 1 and 2.
I looked at a December mock draft before I had to write something for ESPN about like off-season needs, and I saw somebody who had no quarterbacks in their first round or none in their top 20. And then I saw now somebody had like Deshaun Watson 3rd and Mitch Trubisky 4th or whatever. By the time the draft comes around, quarterbacks will go like, it'll be, what was it this year? Goff Wentz. Like, nobody falls in love with these guys during the season, so they're never number 1 and 2. But come April, they're going to go 1 and 2 again.
Everybody's reaching for a quarterback. What about free agency? What direction do you think they go?
Well, free agency, the number 1 need, I think Mike would probably agree with me on this, is edge rusher.
Yeah.
But
I would have agreed with you in the same time in 2015, the same time in 2014.
I don't know,
But those guys are expensive.
They are, but the Saints are going to have more cap money. They're not going to have like last year's New York Giants cap money. But I think the projection right now is $36 million, and they'll re-sign, that'll go down, but they still should have some money. The one thing I don't know is I'm not convinced, and maybe you've looked at the free agents, but I don't know that this year's edge rush crop is the same as last year's. Last year there was Vernon and Ayers, and there were some defensive ends in there. The only big name I can think of is Jason Pierre-Paul.
Yeah, those are 2 very different guys, though. You said Vernon and Ayers. Olivier Vernon went to the Giants for
A lot.
a gabajillion dollars, and I don't think they can spend a gabajillion dollars on a guy, and except for Jarris Bird, that's never been their MO. Robert Ayers, though, is a guy who I wrote a lot about last offseason. I thought he'd cost about $7 million a year. He cost $7 million a year, and Tampa Bay's very happy with him. They spent $7 million a year on Kobe Fleener, which I was pretty stunned by.
Yes.
Linebacker Danny Trevathan was in that same range, and he went to the Bears. I was surprised they didn't do that last year. I think if there is a Robert Ayers type this year, I would have to think, but I thought it last year too, that is where you want to spend $7 or $8 million a year on a guy. I don't know who that guy is, though. I can't tell you right now this is that guy. But, yeah, Jason Pierre-Paul will probably cost 3 years, $50 million or something like that. I don't know if that's what they're going to do this offseason.
Right side of the offensive line is aging. Again, Zach Strief, a decent contract, not something that's really overwhelming for him. You look at Jari Evans, played very, very well. Is that something they look in the draft for, or is that something they feel because of the age of these two players, there's an immediate need there?
Yeah, if they're going to have to talk to Jari and Zach before the start of free agency and decide what they want to do and what they want to do. Like, those players could both contemplate retirement. I think if both of those players say, I've got another year in me, they both played well enough this year to say, all right, we've got our starting right tackle and our starting right guard in the building. Now we can maybe look to draft those positions. If one of those guys says they're going to retire, then it becomes a free agent priority. But there is no question that you are now thinking those guys are heading in. We've talked about Breeze earlier. I think Breeze will play till he's 40, 3-4 more years. Those two guys, I think you've got an expiration date on them, probably one more year for both of them.
Joe?
I think it goes back to what Mike was saying earlier about if the Saints decide they have a need there, I think it doesn't matter if there's a guy in free agency that's available and you like, even if you've brought Jari back and Zach back, you go get him. And if there's a guy in the draft, you go get him. And a surplus of anything in the NFL at any position really isn't a bad thing.
Right.
We always look at it as, well, they've got too many of this and not enough of that. But as we find out every year, some position is going to blow up. But not
and Zach Strief is the kind of guy who said it before. If I'm your sixth offensive lineman this year, backing up at all four positions except center, then so be it. I'm happy to do it. Like, exactly right. If they see the right guy in free agency, they'd hop on him.
Now, it's hard to project the draft because free agency is where they like to fill their holes. But just off the top of your head, for giggles and grins, your thoughts on what direction they go in the draft?
Edge rusher. It's not only is it a need, but this year as opposed to last year. Last year everyone was saying deep defensive tackle draft.
Yes.
This year, every single evaluator for whatever worth they have, every single evaluator is saying there's edges all over the place. There's, all kinds of them with first round grades. And so it might be a case of need matches up with what's available, the depth in the class. Cornerback is another position that looks like, at least from what I've seen so far at this very early point in the process, another point that's very, very deep, and maybe you go for a guy there because there's so much talent there.
What could you add, Mike?
Those are the two perfect positions because there are also two positions where we talked about can you have enough guards and tackles? You can never have enough pass rushers and corners.
Sure.
This guy pencils in as our fifth corner, so what? Yeah. Edge rusher and corner, which are always needs. You don't go into a draft saying we got to get a linebacker necessarily, and not in the first round. I mean, sometimes none of them even go in the first round, but there'll be one or two. But if the guy is special, you can draft him as your first. Basically, this is what they'll probably do. They'll probably say, let's get an edge rusher, let's get an interior lineman, and let's get a corner. Maybe that's rounds 1, 2, and 3. But if in round 1 you draft a middle linebacker and round 2 you draft a quarterback, then you draft those guys in 3, 4, 5. Yeah. So you don't ever want to be so stuck on a need that you don't take a great player at those other positions.
Let's head to the phone lines, 866-3200. Our guests tonight, Joel Erickson of The Advocate and Mike Triplett of ESPN. Tom is in Metairie. Tom, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. Hey, Tom.
Guys, how you doing?
Doing great.
I just wondering, you guys are talking about the defensive coordinator, Dennis Allen. I'm wondering maybe if Peyton looked at what he did the last couple of years by keeping his own guys on defense. And maybe this year, throughout the year, Dennis Allen maybe complained a little bit to Peyton about, having these guys and wanting his own team, and maybe at the end of the year did an evaluation, and maybe Dennis Allen said, I want to hire my own team. I'll hang up and listen to you guys.
Guys?
I think that they all respect each other enough that it wouldn't happen in exactly that way, but it could certainly have passively aggressively come to that where, Dennis Allen has these big, bold ideas, and Joe disagrees, but Bill doesn't think so, but I kind of think so. And Sean might have heard that over and over again and thought, you know what? If Dennis thinks this, and I agree with Dennis, and Joe and Bill think this, then you know what? But I don't think it was Dennis saying, all right, darn it. Yeah. I'm putting my foot down.
Yeah, this is my defense.
I'm hiring my own guy.
Right.
Yeah, but there is no question that it could be that Peyton realizes, you know what? Dennis thinks this way. These guys think this way. I think we need more guys that Dennis sees eye to eye with.
I don't know. I wouldn't presume to guess at what Dennis thought, but I did wonder the same thing that Tom did when I saw all those front line guys go. I wondered, how much influence did Dennis have on this decision?
Yeah, so did I. Greg is in Houma. Greg, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. Hey, Greg.
Hey, guys. Got a question for you. So who do y'all think is going to be the big trade bait that the Saints have on free agents? And who do you think they're going to keep after on free agency, spending more money than they should? Now hang up and listen.
So he said trade bait?
Trade bait, yeah.
I don't see it this year because, in theory, my jaw wouldn't hit the floor if they traded Brandon Cooks for a big haul because the same things Brandon Cooks expressed disappointment with, he thinks he's more than just a guy who should be used as a clear-out receiver, and you can get a Ted Ginn Jr. or a Devery Henderson for that. Well, maybe the Saints feel the same way because Michael Thomas can be a go-to guy. Willie Snead can be a possession receiver, and we could have another deep receiver running routes. If Brandon Cooks is going to get us a first-round pick or a second and a fourth, or they traded Kenny Stills one year for a third and Daniel Ellerbe.
Right.
I wouldn't be shocked. I don't think they're shoving Brandon Cooks out the door or they're mad at him. And obviously, he should want to stay here because this offense equals yards and touchdowns.
Of course.
But there's a piece that could mean more to another team than it means to the Saints. I don't think they'd trade away Andres Peter, Teron Armstead, even though there's two left tackles on one team, so there's something. But the rest of it is you don't trade Jarris Byrd because people don't want to take on that salary. You don't trade Mark Ingram. So, but if you're talking about a trade, you're talking about taking something that you have as a surplus that would be in high demand. So those are the only kind of guys. In free agency, it's funny this year. Last year I used to make lists right after the season of guys who I thought were going to be cap cuts or expendable.
Right.
So there's no obvious choices for guys who have to go this year because of their salaries. Jarris Byrd has to take a pay cut to stay. He's the one guy who is either taking a huge pay cut or leaving. There's no one else on my list of this guy's probably played his last snap for the Saints, although there will be a few who move on.
Joel?
The one that stuck out when he asked the free agency, and this might not have been his question, but the number that the guy that I thought was Nick Fairley. Nick Fairley was here on a one-year deal. He had a big year. He plays a position where he's going to command a lot of money.
Right.
And the question is, are the Saints going to outbid everybody, or do they have a number in mind? And I don't necessarily know what the answer is there.
What do you think? Because that was going to be one of my questions. What will it take to keep Nick Fairley in New Orleans after the year that he had? And are you rolling the dice a bit when you look at his history?
Oh, you're definitely rolling the dice. He's a guy who had 2 really good years in Detroit and then 2 years with not very much impact, one in Detroit, one in St. Louis. Of course, in St. Louis, he was stuck behind some guys. But you're rolling the dice there. This isn't a guy who's got 6 years of 6 sacks. He's got 3 years of around 6 sacks and 3 years of not very much production. So it's a roll of the dice, money-wise. When I looked at Spot Rack earlier and looked at what everyone has, there's going to be some teams that can afford to really overpay him.
Everybody's got money.
Right. There's going to be some teams that can really afford to overpay him, and so I wonder if his number doesn't go up beyond even what you'd think it would be, just because some teams have the cash.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Look, that's the case of any free agent. To sign one, you've got to pay way more than they're worth. To keep one, you've got to pay way more than they're worth. I do think Nick Fairley stays in New Orleans, though, for a couple of reasons. One, I don't think his 5.5 sack year or 6.5 sack year in New Orleans is going to lead to this monster payday, because he was a free agent each of the last 2 years. And both years he signed a small one-year deal. Teams are scared off of him. They are buyer beware with him. And it's not like they said, that guy revitalized the Saints defense. Like, he's not going to be paid an absurd amount. He has done enough, I think, over the last 3 years to earn himself a good, solid deal. But it's not going to be an astronomical deal. The other thing is, I think he would take less to stay in New Orleans. I think things worked out so well for him, 2 hours away from his hometown.
Yes.
I think he really felt comfortable here. So I think you can get him back for a really fair deal.
Let's go to Jeffrey on the West Bank. Jeffrey, welcome. Hey, Jeffrey, you with us? Okay, let's move on to the next question. Can we roll that up, please? When will the Saints win another Super Bowl? That's one of our great viewers. Chris, if I had that crystal ball, man, I'd be all over that Powerball. But your thoughts?
It's 2011,
right?
An option. Can we replay 2011? Right. They should have won their second one that year. My thought on the Super Bowl, I've been saying this for a long time. 2009, they were a special team. 2011, they were a special team. They're not that anymore. I do think they can become, I think next year they could be this year's Atlanta Falcons, easily. I could see that exact season happening. Lighting it up on some teams, getting on a roll, going 11-5, being the number 2 seed in the NFC. Absolutely think that could happen. I think they could win a Super Bowl like the Ravens won one in 2012, like the Giants, both times they won theirs, get hot at the right time. I do not see them very close to being the 14-2 dominant NFL team. But an 11-5 NFC South winner that gets a 2 seed and things fall right, it's possible with Drew Brees. It's possible to get hot at the right time. That's what you're hoping for at this point, I think, to be the 6th or 7th or 8th best team in the NFL and win a Super Bowl that way. I think they're very far off from being one of the 2 best teams in the NFL from start to finish.
You want to take that, Joel?
I'd agree with that. But I'm a guy who says if you can get into the playoffs, you really have a shot because of some of the teams that Mike mentioned.
The Green Bay Packers, Joel's hometown team, is another perfect example this year. They might win it this year.
Right. And so you just have to, Mike says he feels like they're the Atlanta Falcons. I think Mike and I have a little side bet going on who's going to go further, the Falcons or Seahawks. But I think the Falcons could be a Super Bowl participant just because of how good their offense is. And New Orleans has the pieces to have that kind of offense. And then it just depends on what the matchups are. I mean, if they were in this, if the Saints were in this current crop of NFC playoff contenders without a great defense left anymore, they got a shot.
Right. Let's see if we can squeeze Scott in. Scott, we got less than a minute. What's your question, my friend?
Hey, man, thanks for taking my call. My question is, when we got rid of Jimmy Graham, was that last year, and Saints said we're going to go to a run team first. What happened to that idea?
All right, you got
Scott, the Saints never said that. Everyone thought that they got rid of Jimmy Graham because he couldn't block, and they signed Ingram and Armstead, and they acquired Max Unger. So everybody thought from the outside, this means they're becoming a run team. As long as Sean Payton and Drew Brees are here, embrace it, though. There are a lot of boring offenses out there. This team is so much fun. Watch a Houston Texans playoff game and then call back and say you want to become a run-first team. They will never become a run-first team.
Joel, you agree?
That was right when I was coming on the beat, and I remember reading some of that analysis. But even when they did that, even when they brought in Max Unger and signed Ingram, they also signed C.J. Spiller, and C.J. Spiller wasn't really that's not a guy you sign to hammer people. That was a guy that, in theory, they were signing to play, and it obviously didn't work out. I'm not saying it worked out.
Sean Payton does appreciate, though, and he's said a lot this year, having more balance and being good at the run game is important. They'll always be a pass-first team, but they don't want to be a pass-only team.
Guys, great panel tonight. Really, really fun. Thanks so much for being with us. Joel Erickson of The Advocate and Mike Triplett of ESPN. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, there's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night right here on WLAE at 10 p.m. Also statewide on Pelican Sports Television. That's 9 o'clock every Friday night. You catch me on the radio, 990 a.m. WGSO. That's 11 a.m. until 1 p.m. weekdays. You can listen live, download the podcast at ericasher.com. Don't forget, you can catch every single episode of Inside New Orleans Sports at ericasher.com as well. And that TuneIn Radio app is a great way to download to get the show as well. Also, want to thank our guests, Mike Triplett and Joel Erickson. Also, our WLE production staff, including Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Donovan Joseph, Naila Jones, Kenny Juno, and my director, William Hill. New Orleans, thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you right back here next week for another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is the first place award winner of the 2015 New Orleans Press Club's Excellence in Journalism Award for the category of Best TV Sports Show.